Okay, it looks like pretty much everyone is logged in now to the conference line. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the content of today's session, Bloomerang for Benevon, which is a donor database with the Benevon model in mind. And if we go over here to my Bloomerang screen, you're going to notice that the dashboard looks exactly the same as it always has in Bloomerang. The product that we built for Benevon customers, or for the Benevon model, it primarily uses interactions and tasks to track the Benevon model and Benevon information. So you can now track your sustainable funding program within Bloomerang. So we wanted to marry the best practices that we have in Bloomerang for donor retention and constituent communication with the sustainable fundraising model that Benevon came up with and has been working with over the past 20 years to provide a comprehensive solution for people wanting to use that, that Benevon model for a major gift pipeline. So the first thing, if you decide that you want to use Bloomerang for Benevon, you'll have to contact your customer advocate or support rep at Bloomerang so we can turn it on for you. We are able to turn it on very quickly with just the flip of a button. So it can be turned on pretty much immediately if you decide that it is a system that you want to use. And again, the core functionality is still the same within Bloomerang, but we are going to highlight the changes that we made for the Benevon model today during today's session. Okay, so the way that we're going to demonstrate the functionality is we're going to talk through kind of a scenario in which you would be capturing information using the Benevon model. And the way that we're going to represent that is by first logging a point of entry for someone. So let's say that you know, we have our 2 point of entries every month, of course, as a part of the Benevon model. And let's say that we had a point of entry this morning, and we want to capture that point of entry in Bloomerang. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new constituent record for my point of entry attendee. And this person filled out the card that came along with the point of entry with his contact information. So this is going to be our friend Curious George here. And we have a little bit of information about him. He provided us with his email address and his address. And we are just going to go ahead and use my email address. All right. And of course, we have his phone number because we're going to need to follow up with him. All right. So once we save his record, we can go ahead and on his timeline, add an interaction recording that he attended our point of entry. So this is where the Benevon tracking all begins in Bloomerang. So we're going to use an interaction to capture the point of entry date. Let's say that the point of entry was today. Then we're going to put in the subject line that this is point of entry attendance, April. And then under purpose here, we're going to see that we now have Benevon specific purposes to track each point within the Benevon model. So the Benevon model is represented by a circle with 4 points in that circle. The first one is the point of entry, in which you're introducing new people to your organization. The second point in the model is the follow-up that takes place after the point of entry, and really after any big event. The next point in the model is the act. So that can come in one of two forms. either through the ask event or through the Benevon one-on-one ask. And then, of course, we have ongoing cultivation and the free feel-good cultivation events, and that's what we would be using the Benevon ongoing cultivation purpose for. So if you're following the Benevon model in Bloomerang, you're likely going to be using these top 5 purposes more than any of just the generic purposes that we have that come packaged with the standard version of Bloomerang. So again, I'm going to go ahead and track this as a point of entry interaction. And you'll notice on my screen right now that I have the box at the top to record the new interaction information. And then just below that are my custom fields that I have on my interactions in this database. So I'm tracking volunteer information for my organization, so that's why that appears there. But when I go ahead and select Benevon point of entry, the options that are displayed are different. So I now have this Benevon tracking section as well as this Benevon event section that automatically gets displayed whenever I select any of these Benevon purposes. Whenever I change the purpose to a non-Benevon purpose, it removes those for me. So I'm going to go ahead and select Benevon point of entry, and I'm going to select that this, of course, was an in-person interaction because they attended the point of entry. And since this is just the entry for the attendance of the point of entry, I don't have a lot of information about this constituent yet, but I do know who their ambassador was because that's the person who invited them to the point of entry. And that person, of course, is already residing in our Bloomerang database. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus button here in order to find, let's say, that our friend Harry here invited Curious George. And I'm going to also assign a person at our organization who's going to be overseeing the relationship with George here. So that's going to be the team leader assignment that I'm going to select from this dropdown. This dropdown is a list of any users within the Bloomerang database. So it is going to be someone at your organization, again, who is overseeing the relationship. So I could select myself as the team leader, or if I'm entering in this interaction for Joe, I could select Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and select Joe's name here for the team leader. And the rest of the information I'm going to be filling out as I build the relationship with Curious George. So this is all the information that I have at the moment until I make my follow-up call from the point of entry. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save for this new interaction that I have recorded. Okay, so you'll notice that something happened on the screen when I click Save for that interaction that doesn't typically happen in the standard version of Bloomerang. And I just want to make sure that you can all see my screen because I see from one of the participants here that you're not able to see my screen. So if you would mind chatting, okay, great, perfect. Wonderful. All right, we'll continue then. All right, so when I saved that interaction, because that was a point of entry attendance interaction, automatically a follow-up task was created to remind that team leader to follow up for that point of entry attendee, with that point of entry attendee. So all of these fields are automatically populated based on just saving that first interaction. We can see that the due date is automatically set for us 48 hours after the point of entry because in the Benevon model, it's best practice to follow up with those constituents within 48 hours. The subject is the same as the subject from the point of entry interaction. We just indicated, we just added the follow-up language there to indicate that it is a follow-up task. Over to the right here, you'll notice that Joe Smith has been the person assigned to this task because he was the team leader that was assigned. So Joe's going to be the one who will be following up with Curious George. We also have that Benevon purpose of Benevon follow-up automatically populated here. And of course, the follow-up is going to be through phone, so that's automatically populated with phone. And then we've taken the script that Benevon has created for their follow-up call, and we've added it to the notes here. So as the team leader is making the follow-up call, they have this available to them to keep them on point with what they need to ask the constituent. This information can remain in here if they would like, or it can be removed as the questions are being answered. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment. You'll also notice that we brought through any of the information that was populated on the previous interaction. And we will continue that as we create more interactions on the constituents record. So the ambassador, you don't have to populate that again, nor do you have to populate the team leader again. You could always change the team leader here if you needed to, if it changed hands at the organization, but it's automatically going to continue populating that information for you so that you don't have to update it again. So again, this section down here is behaving differently than any of the other fields in the standard Bloomerang system because it is pulling through all of that information that was on the previous interaction into your new task or into any new interactions that we're creating for this constituent. So you can see all of the current information and update it as needed in the same screen instead of having to go somewhere else to update that information. But since this task was created for Joe, I'm not the person who's going to be completing this task. I was just helping out by entering the point of entry attendees and the point of entry cards for Joe. So instead of completing this task, I'm just going to go ahead and save or cancel out of here. And then when we go to the timeline, you'll notice that we have two items on our timeline now. The first one is for the point of entry attendance that I added. And of course, it's the automatic follow-up that was created from the point of entry attendance that was added. You'll also notice that there's a Benevon logo on these timeline entries, so you can easily identify any Benevon specific timeline entries on the timeline. We've also added a Benevon filter here. So if you end up having additional timeline entries that without the Benevon specific purposes, you can easily filter out and identify any Benevon specific timeline entries using the Benevon filter. Okay, so we're going to continue following Curious George through the process here in just a moment. Of course, if Joe came to Curious George's timeline here, he would be able to go to the task that we created for him to follow up with George. Otherwise, as soon as he logs into Bloomerang, he's going to see that he has a task on when he sees the active tasks on the dashboard. So he can click on it from there, and he can also follow up by clicking the follow-up task in his task list. So the person who is entering the task does not necessarily have to be the person who's completing the task. And so they will be notified when they see their task on their task list there. So if Joe, let's say Joe is no longer the person who will be overseeing George's relationship with us, so I'm going to switch it to my name. I'm also going to add here, because I'm making the follow-up call now. So, of course, I'm going to thank George for coming. I don't need to keep that in there. I'm going to ask him what he thought, and I'm going to be quiet and listen. I'm not going to keep these questions in here, but I am going to type a summary of the call and have that as my note. And specifically, want to make sure that we answer these two questions. Is there any way you see yourself becoming involved with us? And is there anyone else that you think we ought to invite to a point of entry event? So I'm going to go ahead and just again summarize this. You're welcome to leave the questions in there and put the responses directly after the question. But I'm just going to mention here that George is interested in our Building Communities program. He has been part of other organizations of this kind, We will meet next week to discuss more opportunities. His brother may also be interested. Okay, so I have my notes captured from my follow-up call. I can also come down here now and change the team leader, of course, to my name, and I can track what his current level of interest is with our organization. So if we were blessed in releasing him because, you know, 50% of the people who attend our point of entry events are not going to be interested in hearing from us after the follow-up call, we would have used this bless and release option here. However, there is going to be some post point of entry cultivation happening, so I'm going to mark that here. He may be interested in becoming an ambassador or volunteering, but we're going to need to build the relationship a little bit further before indicating that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it just as post-POE cultivation for now. I did find out, of course, which of the 3 buckets he's most interested in, which of the 3 stories that resonated with him the most during the point of entry. So it sounds like it's building communities. So we're gonna mark that for now. And then his primary reason for being interested in the organization. So we can say that he had a mentor who instilled the passion for building communities, or whatever the primary reason for the interest is, we can capture that there. If this was an event, we could capture the event type. We could also capture if they had just been invited through this interaction, if they were RSVPing or declining the invitation, if they attended, if they did not show, who invited them, and the table captain. So let's go ahead and save this because this is just the information that we have from the follow-up call. Any additional information from the follow-up call we could capture here. Now you may be thinking to yourself, how are these levels of interest established and how are they managed? Because this list may include some of the values that your organization is using. It may include just this bless and release value that your organization is using based on the Benevon model, and everything else doesn't look exactly as you would want it to. This is a field that is manageable. A lot of these fields here, even though they are displayed in the same section where custom fields would normally be displayed on interactions, a lot of these fields are built in based on the Benevon model. For example, the ambassador is required, the team leader is required. If this constituent didn't have an individual ambassador, you could always associate the organization as an ambassador. So you could create a constituent record for the organization and add the organization record as the ambassador. But there has to be some reason or way that the constituent became involved with our organization. So that needs to be tracked as a part of the Benevon model. Also, the team leader is required on any Benevon interaction because someone has to be overseeing and managing this relationship. Someone's responsible. So these are both required fields on all Benevon interactions. And then the ask fields over to the right here, we're going to talk about those a little bit more in a moment. But again, these are all based off of what Terry Axelrod, the founder of Benevon, is requiring when their coaches meet with their clients to discuss the readiness for ask of their constituents and the levels of interest, the buckets, the reason for interest. These are all very important to understand as a part of building the relationship with the constituent. And so that's why those fields are included. So not every field is manageable or can be changed, but this levels of interest field and this buckets field, of course, can be changed. So I'm going to show you where to do that in just a moment if you're wondering about how those fields are managed. So let's go ahead and complete this interaction, or complete this task, rather. We're going to complete it and save it as an interaction. And the completed date is going to be marked as today. Okay, great. So now I'm done with all of my follow-up calls for my point of entry. Of course, I would have more along the lines of 10 to 12 here if I was the team leader overseeing the follow-up for that specific point of entry. But we're going to go ahead and go to our settings section for just a moment here so you can see where you can manage those levels of interest in those buckets. So under custom fields, since these resemble kind of the area where the custom fields live in Bloomerang, we decided to add those to the interaction custom fields area. And you can see now that there's this Benevon Tracking section. This Benevon Tracking section does not have the same options as a standard custom field section in Bloomerang because, again, we can't delete these out of the database like we can with custom fields because this is a part of the Benevon Tracking model that the Benevon team asked us to include. You can, however, deactivate or add values to each one of these fields. So under levels of interest, for example, I have the values of ambassador and bless and release, but let's say that I have some people who were ambassadors that are no longer ambassadors, so I need a value for former ambassador. Excuse me. I can go ahead and add that value here, and I can use that. If I don't use the table captain option here, I could always deactivate it or delete it as long as no records had been assigned that value. I could delete it. If records had been assigned with that value, I could deactivate it so it wouldn't be available moving forward. I could also move around the order of these values. So if I want bless and release to be at the top, it can be there. So there are some things that can be managed in this list based on your organizational needs. So anything that you add or do here will be saved. The reason this cancel button is here is because we cannot make any changes or save anything in this top edit details section here. Like we cannot rename this field something other than levels of interest. We cannot deactivate the field levels of interest like we can with a standard custom field. We cannot make it required. So that is why the options are a little bit different there. So for buckets, when you first add the Benevon model to your Bloomerang database, there won't be any buckets in the buckets dropdown. It will just say add a list of values. And you can go in here and, of course, add the 3 buckets that you're currently using. If you're no longer using a bucket, you can deactivate it. If you need to rename it, you can do that. So this is, again, a list of managed values where you can either add, delete, deactivate, or edit the values themselves. The buckets field, again, just like with the levels of interest, this field cannot be deleted or deactivated, but the values within the field can. All right. So those are the 2 fields within the Benevon Tracking section that you do have some control in that there is some flexibility with. All right, so let's go back to George here. Okay, so now that George has had some activity with us, we can now see just by going to his constituent record from the summary page what activity we currently have with George in our Benevon summary. So we can see that the first Benevon interaction took place today, and so far the last Benevon interaction is also today because we were really quick with following up with him from today's point of entry. We can also see what the Benevon tracking information is that we have for him on record and the most recent note that we have. So again, this is designed to make sure that anyone who's coming to George's record or any constituent who's engaged with us through the Benevon model can see very quickly without having to dig through the timeline what the activity is, where we are in the relationship with George and within the model. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another interaction because we just had our next meeting. So let's see. So we can say that we met to go over see, building communities. And when I select the purpose, any of these Benevon purposes, so I'm going to select ongoing cultivation, it's going to automatically pull in for me the note from the most recent interaction that I have on George's timeline. So what this means is that I now have the opportunity to have a running log of all of the notes from all of George's Benevon interactions. So I can leave this note here from the last interaction, or I can delete it if I choose that I don't want to have a concatenated or a cumulative list of all of the notes in one place. But if I do want to have a list of all of the notes in one place from all of the interactions, I can just keep adding to this with each interaction that I have with George. So I can say we have a plan to involve George with the committee XYZ. And as I continue adding interactions, I'm just going to continue adding to the notes, and I'm going to have this ongoing note for George. So whenever I go to create a new interaction, I can see exactly where I left off with George. I can see the history with George. And the same thing applies to this Benevon tracking section down here. So from the previous interaction, I can see that Jessica is the team leader now, that he's at the post-PLE cultivation stage. He's definitely confirmed through this meeting that he wants to be an ambassador, so I'm going to check that there. Still focused on the building communities bucket, so we're not going to change anything there. And I also took this as the opportunity to invite him to our Ask event. So I'm going to go ahead and put Ask event down here and that he's invited. And we can go ahead, and since my friend Ross was with me at this meeting, and Ross was the one who really said, hey, you know, we're having this Ask event, you should be part of it. And of course, he knows what the Ask event is all about, because with the Benevon model, there aren't any surprises about, you know, the fundraising element of it. And since Ross is also a table captain, we're going to include Ross as the table captain here on this event record. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. All right. So the relationship is building quite nicely with George. And yeah, things are able to be captured. And again, the way that the Benevon model is designed with the 4 points of the model. And so let's say that we come around to May and we have our Ask event. So I'm going to go ahead and create, again, the interaction for our Ask event. So let's add another interaction here for George. And there could have been other interactions, of course, that took place between now and May, because we're really in tune with George, because he's really excited, really engaged with us. Make sure, of course, I'm going to make sure, yeah, let's do that. All right, so this is the actual Ask event, our annual Ask event. So, and it was a breakfast this time, so we'll note that. Okay, so in our purpose here, again, we are going to choose one of the Benevon purposes, and this time it's going to be Benevon Ask event. And we're also going to select the channel in person yet again. And from this, we have his pledge card, so we can indicate that he is now part of our multi-year giving society, because he indicated from that pledge card that he is going to give us at least $5,000 over the course of 5 years. So I'm going to capture that there. I'm also going to capture that this was for an Ask event, and that he attended the Ask event. And we don't need to capture that he was invited, but who he was invited by, because that was already on the previous one. We don't necessarily need to capture that Ross was his table captain, because that was already on the previous one as well. So we're going to just go ahead and and leave this like that. And we're not going to use this after information here because this is specifically preserved for the one-on-one ask. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And okay, so we have captured here the ask event attendance. So we can click save. And then we can go ahead and enter our pledge for $5,000. And he's going to pay monthly. Actually, he's going to pay annually. $1,000 a year. All right. We can include, of course, any additional information we want to include here on our pledge, and then we're going to save it. All right. So, so you can see pretty much how we're able to track the 4 stages of the Benevon model in Bloomerang. We can also, of course, report on the 4 stages of the Benevon model. You can see here, of course, that the last interaction was the Benevon Ask event on 5/1. So that's great. You can see from this giving summary here that he donated $5,000. So you have the full picture here. You can see that he's highly engaged. The engagement level with Bloomerang is at the hot point. So that's wonderful. So we're definitely on our way with George. We're going to, of course, get him invited to some of the free feel-good cultivation events. And one of the ways that we can do that is obviously in person, but if we want to use an email for that, if we go over here to our email template, we can build an email for anyone who's donated or attended or who has an interaction with a specific type of Benevon purpose. So let's say that I have this event reminder already built for a free feel-good cultivation event, and I want to add anyone to this email, or I want to send this email to anyone who is specifically interested in our building communities bucket. The way that I would add that filter is I can type on Benevon to come up with to display all of the Benevon filters that are available to me. And of course, these are Benevon filters that are available in emails, letters, or reporting. And we're going to take a look at reporting in just a minute because I'm sure you have questions about how we're going to be able to do reporting on this data. Okay, but I'm specifically looking for buckets. I typed in Benevon, and you're not seeing Benevon as a part of any of the names of these fields, but we do have the Benevon logo here, so that's how the filter is working. So you don't necessarily need to remember what the field's called. As long as you type in Benevon, you can see all of the Benevon fields because they have that Benevon logo associated with them, and then you can look through the list to see which one it is that you want to add. So I'm going to go ahead and select buckets here and building communities. And for this event in particular, we just want to see people who made a pledge. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my transactions. And not just any transaction, but a $5,000 pledge or more. So you can say amount, 5,000 or more. And the type is pledge. There are a couple different ways you can do this, but this is one of the ways. And click OK. Okay, so now these are all of the people who will receive my email. And I'm going to go ahead and get this email sent out. So I see that George Bakers are recipients, so we can go and take a look at his record afterwards. So if I go to save and preview here, take a look at my recipients. Okay, perfect. So actually, let's do Curious George again. Great. So we're going to click Send Now. And one of the things that I skipped over because this is an email template I already built, but I should have shown you, is when I created this email template, within the details section, I specifically selected a Benevon purpose. So again, this is going to follow our Benevon model when I go to Curious George's record. it's going to show on the mass email that was sent out. It's going to bring through all of that tracking information from the most recent Benevon interaction. So when I go to create my next interaction, if this was the last interaction that was added to the timeline, we wouldn't lose that history. So again, we're being very mindful of any of the historical information and being able to retain that as we continue to move forward with creating new interactions. So that will not be lost when sending emails or creating reports. I'm sorry, sending emails or creating letters with Benevon purposes. Okay, so the same way that I created that email, I could also create a letter with a Benevon purpose. And then, of course, I'm also going to be able to report on all of this Benevon data that we have in our database. So if I go to my reports here, I'm going to go to create my first report. And if I go to start from template, you're going to notice at the bottom of the templates page here that we have 3 new report templates specifically for reporting on Benevon data. And these report templates were designed with the Benevon coaching in mind. The reports in the columns here are based off of the reports from the Benevon's 101 hand workbook. So that's why there are certain columns and certain pieces of information that reside in these report templates. They, of course, can be modified. They are just a starting point, but this is really designed to be used with Benevon coaches, what they're specifically going to ask their clients for. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is this readiness for asks, and this is based off of the next 10 asks report. So if I go ahead and run this, click on the template, it's automatically going to render, because we have filters in here with the readiness for ask is any value and ask by when is this month. So in this Bloomerang database specifically, I already had several constituents with asks in the month of April. So I have this list here, and the way that it's being sorted automatically is by this readiness for ask column. So if I hover over this column here, you can see the full name of it is readiness for ask, and this is being pulled directly from the interaction that was created with the ask information. So the next person who I'm going to be asking is Roger here, and of course the next 10 asks are going to be the 10 with the top readiness for ask. So if I have multiple people at a 9, then I'm going to just see all of the people at a level 9 here. But let's go ahead and click on one of these records so we can open it up and see exactly what I mean by a 9 and where this is coming from, because it's something that, again, is specific to how Benevon wants the readiness for ask being tracked. So over here on Roger's timeline, if I go to the last interaction that's on his record, I can see that in this ask section over to the right here, that we have an asker, Sherlock Holmes, who's going to be helping with the ask for Roger, and that his readiness for ask is a 9. This is a 1 out of 10 scale. Again, this is designed with the way that Benevon designs tracking their readiness for ask. And we have the ask by when date, and we also have the ask amount. So once these fields are populated, we can run our readiness for ask report, and we can either use it in the template view here, or we can just save this and start manipulating the data however we want. So we can save and keep editing. This is readiness for ask. And we can put this for this month. If we wanted to change it for next month, because we're looking at what we want to be doing next month, we could easily click into this filter here, and instead of saying this month in the filter, we could select next month. So we can very easily change these filters and add additional filters. The same thing goes for the columns. So right now this report is being sorted by readiness for ask. If I want to sort it by ask by when, then we can quickly sort it that way as well. if I want to group it by askers or by ambassador, I can easily click into the asker or ambassador column and group it by that column specifically. So I can see Danny here. He's going to help us out with 11 of our asks. Jason has 2. Michael's going to be working on 5 with us. So however I want to use this information, I'm able to do that. And the additional columns that we have here, again, based off of the report from the 101 workbook, is ask amount, ambassador, the bucket, the first interaction purpose, and the first interaction date. So we have a lot of information here to help us prepare for the readiness and evaluate what we need to there. Okay, so the next report that I'm going to show you is the point of entry guest sheet. So this is to work similarly as the point of entry master sheet, I believe is what it's called, that's in the Benevon 101 workbook. So Curious George, he was the person that we created today. If I change the date of this month, I don't have that many from this month in this database yet. Let's say that I want to see everyone who's attended a point of entry this year, because I want to see how our ambassadors are doing at inviting people to point of entry. So I'm going to go ahead and change this point of entry to point of entry this year. And let's see. Let's look at last year. There we go. Okay, so of all the point of entries that I had last year, we have the person who invited them. This column is called invited by because that's what it's called in the master point of entry guest list. It's really the ambassador, but let's group on this column here and click OK. So we can see how effective our ambassadors have been at inviting people. So Danny, he's doing really well. He's invited 29 people. Cody just won, so we may need to meet with him about that. Donald Duck has been on fire. Jan Brady's doing a good job. Jason Oliver. So this can help us evaluate how we're doing with our ambassadors or how they're doing with really getting the word out there about our point of entries and inviting people. And again, we have the date that the person attended the point of entry, their name, of course, the levels of interest from the point of entry record, which this, of course, wouldn't be, we wouldn't have had their level of interest from the attendance record. So we could even switch this column for a different column if we needed to. If some of these pieces of data don't have the information you want, you can, of course, remove them, because I don't have this right now. And you can modify these and save them however you would like. So that is an example of a point of entry master guest sheet. We're going to leave that one, and we're going to continue on to our Ask Event attendees. So if our Ask Event hasn't happened yet this year, then there really isn't going to be a need to have the filter for the date of this year. It would be last year, since we're only having one Ask Event a year. But if you had already had your Ask Event, you could run this report to see how many people you had in your database who had attended. And again, this report is grouped right now by team leader. Of course, you can change this, and if you want to change it, instead of to people who have already attended, but to people who have been invited, because we're preparing for the point of entry. See an example of that. Or the people who have RSVP'd, invited, and RSVP'd, be looking at either one of those. And then instead of grouping by team leader, we could group by table captain to see how we're doing with assigning seating so far. So again, once this data is in Bloomerang, you can do a lot with it to either prepare for your ask event or to evaluate it after the ask event. So let's say that we want to know how many people have an interest in the bucket of building communities and also have given us a $5,000 or greater pledge, right? So we can create a report very quickly to tell us that information. So just because I'm not starting from a Benevon template doesn't mean I can't report on Benevon information from our standard template, so our standard report type. So I can go into any of these standard report types and create a report with Benevon data or from Benevon data. So I'm going to go into my standard constituent report here, and I'm going to add a filter because these filters exist in any type of report in Bloomerang once the Benevon functionality is turned on. And you can see that it's Benevon from the logo. I'm going to type Benevon here, and in my bucket, I'm going to put building communities. And I only want to see people in this report who have a bucket with building communities and have given us a pledge of $5,000 or more. So they're part of the multi-year giving society. So when I go under my pledge, select pledge amount. Okay, so 5,000 or greater. And if I wanted to put a specific date range for that pledge, if I want to say that it was from this year that the pledge was made, I could do that. I'm going to keep it just like this, though, for our purposes for today. Okay, so I can see that I currently have 23 people in my database, 23 constituents in this constituent report who are interested in the Building Communities program and who have given me a pledge. So that's included in my filters. Let's say I want to see that information in my columns as well, and then export this to Excel for someone. I can add, of course, any of the Benevon fields as my columns. I can also add the first interaction date, the first interaction purpose, the last interaction date, the last interaction purpose. I'll include the buckets in there. And I can include their team leader, their ambassador, any of that information I want to add into this report. I can add it. I'm going to add these 5 columns for now. And I'm also going to add into this report the pledge information. So let's add in, I could either build the filter exactly as I did in my filters using the hash transactions, so I can specifically see the amount for the pledge. Okay. So that's going to roll up for us and show us anyone who's given a pledge of 5,000 or more. And now I'm going to also add a field for lifetime revenue or lifetime raised. Can add that. So this shows me who's made payments on their pledges so far. If they were just a bunch of pledges that were made during the ask event, I may not have received payments yet. I may have received 1 payment, so that will show me that information very quickly there. So as you see, you can combine, of course, giving information with the information from the Benevon interactions that you've captured in Bloomerang. So this is going to be called our Benevon Building Communities and Pledges report. And so, of course, any of these reports that you create will be listed on your reports page and can be run from the reports page after they're saved. So there's a lot you can do with all of the fields that we're adding for the Benevon data. You can customize the reports however you would like. You can also have the same buckets appear as a part of the transaction information if you choose to capture that information on your transactions. But you can always combine the transaction information with the interaction information and do your reporting that way. So that part it's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and start looking to see if we have any questions. Okay. So there's a question as to whether we should be using some of the codes that are in the Benevon field rather than a constituency code. And I would say that you could certainly do that. It depends on how you're using your constituent codes. If you're using your constituent codes to track information outside of the Benevon model for other types of reporting, you still may need to use both. But if you're currently using constituent codes only to track information related to the Benevon model, then you could supplement the levels of interest fields for your constituent codes. The cost of the additional functionality is additional 10% on top of your current Bloomerang license. So let's say that you're at the $99 level a month, it would cost $109. And the reason for that is that whenever we are building in new functionality in the Bloomerang, we have to maintain the Benevon, of course, functionality as well, and make sure to test that to make sure that we're not breaking it as we're releasing new features. So it's a maintenance, it's more of a maintenance charge as to why we're adding that additional 10% there. So it's 10% more for the Benevon functionality. Okay, and then after someone is blessed and released, do they remain in the Bloomerang database, or are they hidden? Do you have to sift through them? It's a good question. So currently, they remain in your database. So as we are having more people sign up for Bloomerang for Benevon, we're going to continue to enhance how this specific version of Bloomerang works. So we may be doing something differently with the blessed and released constituents after we receive feedback from the people using this system to help us figure out what should be done with them. Currently, they are still going to be in the system. You could mark them as inactive, but they will still remain in your Bloomerang system. But we may do something with a future enhancement. We may do something else with the blessed and released constituents. We are going to continue, again, managing and updating this functionality, not just the blessed and released part, but just the functionality as a whole once we have more people using it, because we want to make sure that it's working the way that we need it to for any adopters of it. So know that going into this, that this is a young product. It was just released last month, and that we're excited to have quite a few users using it already, or quite a few customers using it already. I believe we have around 48 currently using Bloomerang for Benevon. And then as people continue to use it, we're going to receive suggestions for enhancements, and we'll incorporate those over time. Okay. And there was a question about the profile picture on the constituent record. So let's go and take a look here. We go to our friend Ross's record. So right now it's just a silhouette. So you'll notice if you hover over it that it tells us if this constituent has a public Facebook page or Twitter handle, that it can be added to the photo area here on the profile. So Facebook changed its permissions after we developed this feature that doesn't allow anyone to pull in a picture through their API unless that Facebook page is a public Facebook page. So the Facebook functionality is more or less helpful for organizations, but not as much as it once was for individuals, because most people do not make their Facebook pages public. What you can do, though, is you can, if you have the Twitter handle, have it populate with their Twitter picture. So if I go and edit here, and if I go to Ross's Twitter page, or type Ross's Twitter handle in there, we can see that it pulls in Ross's Twitter picture for us. So that still is, you know, highly based on an individual's, I mean, Twitter is open API pretty much. They don't lock that down. So that's why it works with Twitter. Again, the Facebook API changed after the feature was built, and they're really trying to make sure that they follow any privacy guidelines that are set by their customers. So it's not easy to get that information out of Facebook anymore unless the constituent has their Facebook page set to public. So more helpful for organizations than individuals. All right, and the last question I have here is, what is the biggest challenge nonprofits have with Benevon? Okay. So wanting to know, what are the challenges that we've heard so far? So I'm going to be very transparent because that's just who I am as a product manager. The biggest challenge that we have heard so far with the Bloomerang for Benevon feature is that currently with our pledges, we do not have the ability to have them as auto-processing. So if I set up this pledge for $5,000 and I receive Ross's credit card information, I don't have any way to associate that with this pledge here. That said, you can set up a recurring donation. So I can set up a recurring donation with the amount. So let's say that it's going to be $1,000 a year. We're going to automatically charge that every year. And I have my credit card information here. I don't have a processor set up in this database, but if I have the credit card information, I can capture that, save it, and then Bloomerang is automatically going to charge that credit card for me based on the schedule and the date that I've set here. So it could be, you know, on the 1st of May every year to do that. Now, we talked with Terry about this, and she feels that this solution is fine. Now, we know that Benevon uses the terminology pledges, so some people really want to see that pledge functionality and see this working in pledges. We are currently working on a feature enhancement. It is in development now to add this same auto-processing capability on pledges, so it should be released within the next couple of months. We're hoping to have it released. It's in active development now. So as soon as it's ready, it will be released, and so you'll be able to do the same auto-processing on a pledge that you can currently do with a recurring donation. So that has been the biggest challenge that I have received feedback on so far. And the rest of the feedback has honestly been very encouraging and very positive. So one of the things that we were really mindful of when developing Bloomerang for Benevon was not to add so much functionality, so many fields, that it took users a long time to add all of the Benevon information. We worked very hard with Terry's team to make sure that we included the information that was necessary to keep in the database while allowing the information that doesn't belong in the database to be managed with the Benevon coaches, and not to muck up the database with every single last detail that maybe could be captured. We want people to be spending time building the relationship, not entering a bunch of data that isn't necessary into the database. But if you do choose to add additional Benevon information into your database because every Benevon model looks a little bit different based on the organization's needs. You can, of course, add additional custom fields on the interaction page or on the constituent page, constituent profile page, to track any of that additional Benevon data that is really important for you. So we tried to make it as useful as possible for all customers following Benevon without, while also giving our customers the flexibility to add any additional fields that they might need using our standard custom field functionality. Okay, well, I think that is it for today. We do have a recording from today's session, so if you're interested in reviewing it again, you'll be able to do that through the recording. We'll also be offering the session again in a couple weeks, so if you have any colleagues who might be interested in sitting in, please have them sign up. And please don't forget to sign up for other Bloomerang Academy classes. We have some great industry knowledge to share with you, and we want you to become a Bloomerang and donor retention master, so please take the time to attend our Bloomerang Academy sessions. Whenever you get a chance, the content is wonderful, and we appreciate you so much for being Bloomerang customers or being interested in Bloomerang, and we hope to hear from you and see all of you again soon. Thanks. Have a great day.